It is a great pleasure to have Kobbi Nissim joining us for Differential Privacy. Kobbi is a professor at Georgetown University. He used to be at Harvard and then used to be at Ben-Gurion, and he graduated from Weizmann, and you can look up all his academic ancestry on Wikipedia or on his website. Kobbi is well famous for the introduction of differential privacy and working together with Sintet Work, Adam Smith, and don't tell anyone that I forgot it online because I had it in my mind just a second ago, but next one.
Mark McSherry.
Shame. I need this person going around shouting shame. Yeah, for introducing differential privacy, which is one of the most spoken, I think, and hot topics in privacy these days, from companies who are using it, like Apple, and the US census are using differential privacy, and I think that you won numerous awards around that concept, including Test of Times awards. So without much further ado, I think it's a good time to hear Kobbi speaking about differential privacy. Kobbi.
Yeah, thanks very much, Or, for making me wake up so early in the morning and for joining this session of the summer school. This is Privacy in Changing Times, so I thought I should have some coronavirus on my slide. I will not carry them along. And I have to begin with this. Any opinions, findings, and conclusions or recommendations expressed in this material are not those of the presenter, that's me, and not necessarily reflect the views of my funders. Okay, so I'll talk today about differential privacy. I titled it as why, how, and where to. It's quite a long session for me, 2 hours, and I could not fully time it, so let's see how that goes. You're definitely invited to ask questions. I am leaving the chat window on. I'm not sure I can see the Q&A one, but I'm sure Or will give me a note in case there is a question. Okay, and this is not exactly a tutorial, although this is a summer school. I will go over the motivation for differential privacy, some background, how you do differential privacy, and there's another talk by Kamalika later today that hopefully will give you a lot more about the technical stuff and how you do differential privacy in the context of machine learning. And I will also ask where is this line of research in currently and in the near future. Okay, so this talk, differential privacy, why did we get here, properties of this definition, what is the semantics of the differential privacy guarantee and how to do differential privacy very briefly. Then we'll discuss differential privacy in the real world. This is something that we're seeing happening more and more in the recent years. I'll go very quickly over some existing applications. I will highlight some of the challenges, and in particular, we'll highlight the US Census deployment of differential privacy for the 2020 census, for the current census. And we will speak about differential privacy and privacy policy. And then we'll have concluding thoughts. These are 3 parts of the talk, but they are not of equal size. So before I begin, I want to say that differential privacy has evolved since its introduction in 2006 to be quite a big monster. It interacts with many areas of research, including cryptography, databases, complexity learning, online algorithms, issues of false discovery in statistics, mechanism design, programming languages, policy and regulation, questions of using it in practice, fairness, and so on. Maybe I missed a topic or 2. Of course, I won't be able to cover all this, so I apologize for the many omissions that will happen in this presentation. I want to say that something interesting that is happening with this relationship is that in some cases, differential privacy is used as a tool not necessarily for privacy, but as a tool serving other goals. One of them is preventing false discovery. Okay, so without further ado, let me continue and let's begin with their privacy problem. We see more and more data being collected. This is personal data connecting, including in some cases very, very sensitive information about individuals, like their medical or financial or other kind of sensitive information. This information is being collected by governments, but more and more and more by companies, and collected online regularly. It's really rich. And we collect this information in order to analyze it. I will use the term analysis or computation or mechanism interchangeably in this presentation to talk about kind of a mechanical transformation that is applied to collection of personal data and generate some outcome. And the outcomes can be very useful. We can have new scientific findings. We have benefits from medical research. We could do health data analysis. We could use data for policy making. So there are many good applications for data, not only good ones, but many good applications for data. So the goal in this, when we talk about data privacy, is given a data set with sensitive personal information to compute over it and release function of the data set, something useful while protecting individual privacy. And this may sound intuitive to understand what that means, but I think a question that will hover over these 2 hours of presentation today is going, what does this mean? And do we really understand what privacy protection is? So to tackle this question immediately, let's try to test your intuition. I don't think I can do a voting on this Zoom session, so I won't, but try in your heart to answer these questions. I want to say, when is informational privacy preserved? And suppose that data is fed into the computation, we see an outcome, and the outcome is the following. So I'm worried about my privacy because my information is in this data, so it could be leaked via the computation into the outcome. And indeed, the outcome says Kobbi is TCS, that stands for Theoretical Computer Science. I am TCS positive. That's the outcome here. This could be very embarrassing for me in some places. I'm not sure I would want people to know that. Now, the question is whether my privacy is breached by this computation. Think for yourself whether it's clear that my privacy was breached, or it's clear that it was not breached, whether you cannot tell, okay? And I think in the past, the focus of privacy was on the outcome, and people would think that this clearly breaches my privacy. But I want to say that the answer is we can't tell, and for the following reason. It may be that this computation actually is a very simple one. It ignores the data completely, and it just outputs Kobbi as a TCS positive, and it ends. So you could think what maybe came about so that this, what happened so that this computation came about, which is a different question. But if we focus on this computation completely ignores its data and hence cannot leak anything about it, okay? It would say Kobbi TCS positive, whether I am TCS positive or I'm not, and hence this outcome in this sense does not breach my privacy. So because it could be, because I did not tell you what the computation is, it could be that it is this simple computation, you cannot tell. It can be that the computation actually is looking for my data and outputting it, but it can be that the computation just is completely insensitive, completely ignores my data. And in that case, there's no reason to think that the computation caused a privacy breach, and hence we cannot tell. Let's look at the second example. Let's say the outcome says OR is TCS positive. And actually I'm not mentioned in the outcome at all. Okay, is my privacy breached by this computation? Is it clear that it is not breached by this computation? And think for a minute for yourself. But my answer is again going to be that we cannot tell. Because the fact that I'm not explicitly mentioned in the outcome does not mean that the outcome is not about me, that the outcome does not reveal information about me. It could be that the computation is the following one. It first checks whether I am TCS positive. If that is the case, then it outputs OR is TCS positive. And otherwise, it outputs ELI is TCS positive and ends. Okay, so this computation is directly influenced, the outcome of this computation is directly influenced by my data. And it reflects in its outcome whether I am TCS positive or not, even if it does not mention my name. So a lesson to be taken from this is that we really need to be careful, and just looking at the outcome of the computation does not tell us necessarily whether privacy is breached or not. What the object that we should focus on is the computation itself, and we should try to understand how the computation can create some some informational relationship between the sensitive data and the outcome in a way that reveals too much about the sensitive data. Now, data privacy is not a new problem. We see papers, certainly from the 60s, but maybe even earlier than that, focusing on data privacy coming from a few communities, in particular official statistics. And there have been several paradigms that were developed in these many years. And let me focus on two paradigms that I will call two dreams. One paradigm is of anonymization. And the anonymization dream says the following: we can anonymize or de-identify the data. Initially, that was quite naive. The identification was maybe by removal of names and addresses and ID numbers and so on. And the hope was that you could de-identify your collection of personal data and get data that is safe to use because it's de-identified. Okay, so somebody trusted, a curator, removes the identifiers from the data, get an anonymous data set, and hence privacy. Okay, and what's nice about this process is that you only remove the data that is, in most cases, not very interesting for the analysts, especially if we're computing statistics. So we retain much of the utility in the data. And with this dream, the thought is that there is no risk or very little risk to privacy. But unfortunately, science and practice have shown this to be wrong in many cases. And let me give you one classic example. This is the linkage attack that Tanya Sweeney performed in the year 2000. So Sweeney took a data set that was by law, that by law had to be published. It's the Group Insurance Commission data set. It's a data set about hospital and clinic encounters of patients in Massachusetts. It contained patient-specific data about more than 100,000 patients in Massachusetts. And there were about 100 attributes per encounter. And it was an anonymized data set. So the trivial names and trivial identity items like names and addresses and social security numbers were removed from this data set. So here's a typical part of a typical record in this data set. It includes the zip, birth date, and sex. You see there's no name, and some information, demographic information like ethnicity, but also information about a specific visit, like the visit date, diagnosis, procedure, medication, and how much was paid. So this kind of data can be useful for researchers, for policymakers, etc. Let's see why there is also risk in it. So Sweeney took another data set that is public records in the US, that is the voter registration of Cambridge, Massachusetts. It is a data that is open for inspection by anyone. At that time, you had to go to a library. Today, I believe you could get it online. And this data set is considered not to include any sensitive information, or whatever is in it, if it has been decided to be okay to be public. It also has this zip birthday and sex information in it. And you see there is a name here, an address, so we have identifying information, and there's some more information that is not going to be useful for us. And what Latanya did, what Sweeney did, was to join these two data sets and to identify that in many cases, the zip birth date and sex uniquely re-identify people in the GIC data set. And in particular, she could re-identify the medical records of the governor of Massachusetts at the time. And she reports that 6 people had his particular birth date, and of which 3 were men, and he was the only one in his 5-digit zip code. Okay, so she could collect his information and send it to him in an envelope. But what's important is that this is a common phenomenon. And in common, I want to say in 2 ways. One is, Latanya reports that if you take the date of birth plus a 5-digit zip in the US, that by itself re-identifies almost 70% of Americans. If you take 9-digit zip, then this gets too close to 100% of Americans. So this re-identification by just a small number of attributes that may have seemed harmless initially actually is quite common. And the second thing is that this is an experiment that Sweeney repeated over the years with health data, clinical trial data, DNA, pharmacy data, text data, registry information, and whatnot. And she repeated that successfully, showing that this way of re-identifying data is not just limited to the GIC data set, but much more common. So these trials to anonymize the data, at least the naive trials, fail and fail spectacularly. So here are some lessons we can learn from this. Data that was supposedly de-identified often contains alternative ways of identification. In the technical term that we use today, we call these quasi-identifiers. And then with these quantity identifiers, if you have access to the appropriate auxiliary information, the second data set in this case, then this can result in re-identification. And it's important that this is not purely theoretical. This has been demonstrated many times with real-world data sets. So this is a real threat. Let me move on to a second paradigm, which I will call the aggregation dream. And this is, again, a common intuitive idea that you can use counts or averages, statistical models, classifiers, models produced by machine learning algorithms, and so on. And because these are not meant to tell about individuals, but are more holistic, they tell about a population, then the belief is that these are structurally safe. And actually, you see these beliefs in many places until today, even after a lot of research that was performed, which I will mention in a few minutes. For instance, you see this belief in what is called the 5 safe framework that is becoming popular in various countries. So here's this thing. You have a collection of personal data. You perform statistical analysis, you get statistics, and surely no one can use this to learn personal information. And again, unfortunately, science and practice have shown this to be often wrong. And let me give you 2 examples. The first example is the GWAS membership attack. GWAS stands for Genome-Wide Something Studies. And the NIH in the US collects the DNA of individuals with a disease and publishes information about it. These are called minor allele frequencies at about 100,000 positions in the genome. These are called SNPs. Okay, so the release looks innocuous because you average over a collection of individuals. Here's an example. It would be a vector, a very long one with about 100,000 positions. And in each position, you will get the percentage in the population of those who have the minor allele in that location. And this was thought to be HIPAA compliant. The NIH is trusted. We don't have any reason to think that they wanted to do something fishy here. But then researchers, Homer et al., and then some theory was given to that by Dwork et al., showed the following. You could look at another data set that has the aggregate information not over the test group, but over the general population. It would look differently. Okay, the test group has something, in many cases, has something special to it, maybe because the test group is about people with a specific disease or something like that. And then suppose you get an individual's DNA. Can you infer whether that person, where the information of that person was used in the study? So here's the victim's genome. For the victim, you see, you don't see percentages, of course. You see whether in each location that person has the minor allele or not. So it's a 0-1 vector. And what Homer et al. Showed, and the theory later also shows, is that if the victim is in the test group, then the correlation between the victim's vector and the test group is going to be higher than the correlation with the population. So you can do a membership attack. You can decide whether that victim was part of the test group. And in that case, that could tell you whether the victim has a specific disease or something else, some more sensitive information about that person. As a result, NIH took down some data sets. I understand that some of them were put back over time, but this definitely highlighted the need to worry about these membership attacks. Another result on aggregates is the Reconstruction attack. This was started by Iri Dinor and myself in 2003, but there is now rich, or at least richer, literature about Reconstruction attacks. I will mention some of it here in my slides. So consider a system where there's sensitive information about n individuals stored in a data set. Okay, let's say for each person, whether they are TCS positive, that very embarrassing information that I did not want to be revealed about me. And let's say that there is a system for answering statistical queries. So here's a researcher. The researcher can issue queries to the system and get answers about the data. These are statistical queries, so we could say, I want to look at this particular subset of people, how many of them are TCS positive, and the researcher will get as an answer a number or percentage that he can use for his research, okay? And let's assume that actually this system returns counts and the accuracy is better than root n. So we realize that without introducing any noise here, it's really easy for a malicious researcher to try to create a group of people and ask whether they are, how many of them are TCS positive, and then remove one person from that group and reissue that question. From the difference between these two answers, the researcher could learn about the person that he removed, whether he is TCS positive or not. This is called a differencing attack. So we allow the system to add noise. We don't tell it here yet how to do that. The only restriction is the accuracy should be better than root n. So with this accuracy, consider some malicious access to the dataset. Can this malicious person learn information about individuals? And it turns out that there is an attacker algorithm that makes about n queries and performs some feasible computation. Actually, it solves a linear program. And then the attacker can reconstruct the data with high accuracy, let's say 99% accuracy. So in data prime here, most of the entries are correct. 99% of the entries are correct. Okay, so it's interesting, like extensions for this work by Dwork, McSher, and Talwar in 2007 show that you can actually modify the algorithm so that the attack is successful. Even the level of noise is much higher than root n for a good portion of the queries. Okay, even that does not foil the reconstruction attack. How does this reconstruction work? So intuitively, at least, each query answer further restricts the space of potential underlying data sets. And with the right query set, if you choose your query set wisely, if the attacker does that, then this can lead to a very small space of very similar data sets. And because the original data set is always in this feasible set of similar data sets, we get that each of them is similar to the original one, and hence we get a successful reconstruction. And you would think that the right query set needs to be chosen very carefully by the attacker, but in the attacks that I mentioned from 2003 and 2005, actually the queries are just made all at once and are completely random. So it's not that uncommon to see, it may be not that uncommon to see that the right set of queries, the right for an attack was actually happening, even if it happened inadvertently. And we'll go back to this in just a minute. And importantly, this is not only a theoretical result, although for many years it was just written in papers, but we see in the last few years that reconstruction attacks work in practice. One simple example is a work that Aloni Cohen and myself did in 2018, where we used a company called Aircloak put a challenge with a product. And it didn't take, frankly, it didn't take too much work to mount a reconstruction attack on that product using a variant of this paper that I mentioned by Dwork, McSher, and Talwar. And we actually won the challenge. But much more importantly is this work that was done initially internally in the US Census 2 years ago, where they took the large number of tables that were published for the 2010 decennial census. So in the US, there is a decennial census every 10 years. If the year ends with a 0, then it's a census year, like this year, 2020. So they took that number of tables and they constructed this defines like many constraints on the underlying data, okay? And they reconstructed the census data. Actually, that was also reproduced by a statistician who works in the School of Journalism in Columbia, Mark Hansen. So his team reproduced the attack. The code is available if you want to play with it. And this is the GitHub repository. And with from Hansen's team, you can get a full reconstruction of Texas, the Texas census in 2010, but you can replace the data and also apply it with some changes to other states. And both the census and Hans's team did the following. They linked the reconstructed data with data sets that were commercially available in 2010. And they obtained correct reconstruction and identification about 17% of the population. Okay. I'll go back to this attack because it's very meaningful for one of the uses of differential privacy today. So we see that these two dreams actually are false dreams or can be false dreams and are susceptible to attacks, to successful attacks. Here are some lessons learned. New attacks mode emerge as research progresses. I'm not sure that many people thought about membership attacks as problematic back then in maybe only 15 or 20 years ago, but now we understand that in some settings, membership attacks are important, and some new modes of attacks may emerge in the future. The reduction of identifiers and the release of aggregates is insufficient for obtaining privacy. We should take auxiliary information into consideration. This is a real problem because we don't know what kind of auxiliary information is really out there. And more importantly, we don't know what kind of auxiliary information will be out there in the future. And a lot of data needs to be kept private for many years. In particular, if you think about the US Census data, so formally it cannot be revealed for 72 years after the performance of the census. So now I think we can see the data collected for the 1940 census. Okay. Another lesson is that a lot of these solutions are kind of ad hoc, they are intuitive, and there is a lack of rigorous analysis, and this lack of rigor leads to unanticipated privacy failures. This is something that I will push on and again and again. Another lesson is that we have, over the years, neglected to take into account the possibility that a combination of analysis outcomes leak information. So each of the analysis may leak very little information about each individual, but maybe when you put them together, you get a break, like in the reconstruction attacks. And so this leakage accumulates. And we have to remember that these are shown to be mathematical facts, and also that these attacks work in real life. So this is not just a matter of policy. So it might be that we should conclude the talk with this doom and gloom slide. We lost privacy. Let's go on with our lives. But let's see if there is some reason for optimism. This is why I put like a pink background for my slide here. And I think for myself, some reason for optimism is we could look at what happened in foundations of crypto since the late 70s. So before the 70s, crypto was maybe in some ways similar to these ad hoc measures applied in privacy. There was probably some theory, but not as rich as we know it today. And the security definitions were not that rigorous, and the analysis wasn't that rigorous. And since the late 70s, we've seen this field flourish, and a lot of it is because we have rigorous definitions and rigorous analysis, and our standard of what we expect from a crypto analysis has gone to a completely different place since the late 70s. So this has transformed cryptography from something like, looked like a craft to a science, and to the point that today, that the cryptography part is rarely, if any time, it's rarely the cause of a security flaws, okay? So you get a security flaw because implementations of crypto and because of other holes in systems but not because of a direct attack on what was shown to be secure, even if this shown to be secure is under some unproven assumptions that we have, unfortunately, to use. And let me mention some relevant influential concepts. There are many. I just chose a couple here. One is the concept of probabilistic encryption from Goldwasser and Micali early in the 80s, and in particular, the notions of semantic security and the indistinguishability of ciphertext that we use and love today. The second influential concept is of composability, and here I just mentioned the work of Frank Cadetti on universally composable security. So it may be that protocols, when they stand alone, they are secure, but when you compose them together in a system, they lose some of their security. So composition properties are important for protocols so that they can live in arbitrary setups, like in the soup of protocols that is run over the internet. So by the time we started working on privacy, I think the research was largely ad hoc and lacked rigor. And this lack of rigor led to unanticipated privacy failures. And these failures came in many flavors. This lack of rigor came in many flavors, and there was lack of rigor in setting clear and meaningful privacy goals, and lack of rigor in analyzing resilience to future attacks, in taking user information into consideration, in accounting for the privacy loss across multiple releases. This is similar to composition in cryptography, and in understanding how the technical conceptions of privacy interact with our normative understanding of these concepts. And I'll try to touch upon these points during this talk. So here's a question: can we apply crypto rigor to data privacy? Okay. And here's the first part of an answer. Already the reconstruction attacks are useful. Okay, so these attacks are a way to create rigor in our thinking about privacy. And the reconstruction attacks delineate clear boundaries to what cannot be computed while respecting any reasonable notion of privacy. So even if we do not yet, even when we don't yet know exactly what we want to mean by privacy, how to formalize what privacy is, if we can mount a reconstruction attack, then clearly privacy has not been achieved. So in a pictorial way, let me draw it this way. There is the reconstruction land here, okay? And it sets a boundary. So clearly privacy should be here on the right. This is the privacy land. What exactly is the boundary for the privacy land? I don't yet know. It may be this boundary. It may be this boundary, which is interesting because at some point it actually is tangential to what we can do with reconstruction. So this is a point where we see a transition, a sharp transition from a private computation to reconstruction, meaning that we, in a sense, we exhausted all that we could do with privacy in the data in such a place. What is clear is that this boundary is not good, because it cannot be that some measures give privacy and also allow reconstruction. We shouldn't believe that if you can reconstruct the data accurately, say like 99% accuracy, that privacy is preserved. So reconstruction is useful in drawing some lines on this map. Now, in the progress towards the definition, there's been some works. I mentioned the work on reconstruction attacks. And in terms of definitions, the early works by Iri Dinur, Sigal Work, and myself presented a privacy definition and some mechanism. Today we call it the Gaussian mechanism that satisfies this privacy definition. In retrospect, there are similarities between this definition and differential privacy, but definitely we did not understand the semantics of the definition at the time. And similarly, we did not understand how it composes, even how it self-composes. There was also work from the database community. I'll mention this paper by Fimievsky, Gerke, and Srikant in 2003, so about the same time, where they spoke about privacy in what we today call the local model. In 2005, in work with Blum and work in McSherry, we showed how to produce private statistics and how to do some machine learning with privacy. Again, the same privacy definition from these papers in 2003 and 2004. And here, Cynthia and Frank also developed more the semantics of this definition and introduced the notion of informed adversary to explain it. And a year later, in 2006, differential privacy was presented, and there is a beautiful paper by Dwork and Naor that makes a case for differential privacy, explains technically why a naive tried to define privacy, some naive tries to define privacy that were very popular in the literature are bound to fail. And the main reason is the existence of auxiliary information, and make a case for a definition like differential privacy, why this is a good way to continue. So what's differential privacy? And before I tell you what it is, I want to say what it's not. Differential privacy, although we use colloquially, we use the term as something that does something as if it's a technique. It is not a technique. It's not a particular technique or particular mechanism for guaranteeing privacy, but rather it is a definition or a standard of privacy. Okay, so it's a definition. And more precisely, we see now variants of differential privacy emerging, and for good reasons. These variants allow for more and more efficiency in terms of the overall noise that needs to be added in computations. But they all share the same flavor as the original definition of differential privacy. So this standard of privacy gives us a framework for thinking about privacy, for analyzing privacy loss, and so on. Okay, so this definition expresses a specific desiderata of an analysis. And let me first write it in words, say it in words. It requires that any information-related risk to a person should not change significantly as a result of that person's information being included or not included in the analysis. Okay, and I'll try to explain this long sentence now in a picture. So I'm going to use a paradigm that was well developed in crypto, the ideal world versus real world paradigm. In the real world, data is fed into an analysis and we see an outcome. I want to say that this is a very simplified picture. In reality, there is also a feedback loop here. So we're based on the outcome, which is new analysis and so on. I'm totally aware of that, and this is taken care of in the theory of differential privacy. Just for the picture here, this is omitted. So a reason for me to be worried is, as before, that my data is there. Maybe the analysis will reveal that I am TCS positive. Okay. So in my ideal world, maybe the same thing would happen. I recognize that the analysis is important. Okay. I would want to learn the outcome, but I'd rather that to happen with my data removed from the data set. Then I would feel that my privacy is not at risk. My data is not there. So if the outcome was the same in the real world and in my ideal world, I would feel that my privacy is not harmed by this analysis. Okay. That's good. Actually, this is something we could do. We could just omit my data from the data set and perform the analysis, and that would preserve privacy for me, but not other people's privacy. And our goal is to provide this kind of protection, not only to myself, but also to Or and Ellie and Susie and everybody who's in the data. So can we provide this kind of protection simultaneously to everyone? It turns out that if we insist on this strict requirement that in crypto we usually have, that the outcome is the same or really almost the same in a very strict sense, meaning that there is a negligible statistical distance between the outcome distributions here. If we insist on that, then we cannot get any useful, anything useful from the data. So we have to relax this requirement, and instead we will require that the outcomes are similar. There's going to be a measure of similarity here, and there's going to be a parameter. Usually we use the Greek letter epsilon to denote this parameter. And what we would require is that in anybody's ideal world compared to the real world, these outcomes would look epsilon similar, okay? And this relaxation, where epsilon is not going to be negligible, but is going to be a tangible function, or maybe even you should think about it as a constant in many cases, a small constant. This relaxation allows to get privacy and utility from the data. Because this gives differential privacy. I'll give the mathematical definition in a minute. I want to say a few things. One is this notion of similarity needs to be chosen carefully. It's not going to be an accidentally chosen notion of similarity. And the goal is to make the chance of every event almost the same in my ideal world and in the real world, okay? And the other thing is that maybe a little counterintuitive, we're going to parameterize differential privacy with this parameter epsilon. So the smaller epsilon is, the better privacy that you get, not the larger. So epsilon actually measures leakage or potential harm rather than measuring privacy. So let's look at the definition. So this is the definition from 2006. It was initially called by a different name, but I think differential privacy is a much better one. And a few things to look at this. So let's begin reading. It talks about algorithms, actually randomized algorithms. And indeed, in order for algorithms to satisfy differential privacy and also have some utility, they must be randomized. So a randomized algorithm, M, taking a data set of N records from some domain X to some output T, domain output T satisfies epsilon differential privacy if for all what we will call neighboring data sets, so these are X and X prime, that differ on exactly one entry, the outcome distribution of M applied to X is almost the same as that applied to X prime, and they are different up to that measure of epsilon. Okay, so one thing I want to emphasize here, if you remember these test your intuition examples at the beginning of my talk, where I said it's important to look at the algorithm, not the algorithm's output. This is because the algorithm is the thing that can create some relational, informational relationship between the sensitive input and the output. So indeed, this is the privacy that looks at the algorithm. This is a privacy definition that looks at the algorithm. We said the algorithm preserves privacy, not the outcome of the algorithm preserves privacy. Now, to instantiate this notion of similarity, I will now complete the definition. We require that for any subset of the outcome space, okay, so if you know statistical distance, this should be reminiscent of what we're doing there. So we're looking at every potential subset of the outcome space. We require that the probability of the outcome being in that subset is about the same for X and for X prime. When we apply the mechanism M or the algorithm M on the data set X or on the neighboring data set X prime, and this, but we allow some slackness, and this is a multiplicative factor of e to the epsilon. Remember that if, so the parameter epsilon, as I said, measures leakage or potential harm. And for small epsilon, e to the epsilon is about 1 plus epsilon. So if epsilon is small, then the ratio between these probabilities is close to 1. As I said, we cannot think about epsilon as too small, not 2 to the minus 80, not cryptographically small, and not even 1 over n, because that precludes utility from the data. But oftentimes we can think about epsilon as small constants, like 1 in 100 or 1 in 10, or maybe 1. When you go a lot above 1, then e to the epsilon grows very fast. So we lose this linear growth that we have for small epsilon. And then the requirement may become too relaxed. And so what I presented is a version that is called pure differential privacy. As I said, over time now we have a plethora of definitions. Maybe the two most important ones are of pure differential privacy and what is called approximate differential privacy. In approximate differential privacy, there is a second parameter, delta, okay? Here it's an additive error in this inequality. And delta, this delta, we think about it, it can be, it should be very small to be meaningful. Often we think about delta as cryptographically small, okay? But it turns out that by addition of this delta, we can do a lot of computation with a lot less noise in differential privacy. And this is one of the reasons for introducing such the second parameter. While we do that, we change a little the semantics of differential privacy. In the following, I will mostly look at the pure differential privacy case, which is the simplest one. But because delta is so tiny, the change in the semantics is really small, and we're left with roughly the same semantics. So now we have new privacy concepts. It's important that all of them can be shown to not to allow reconstruction, at least in some sense, so we can prove that. So this is the land of differential privacy. It's actually a lot of definitions. Currently, we have Gaussian DP and concentrated DP and approximate DP and computational DP and Renyi DP and pure DP. And I probably missed a couple. What should also be on this land on the privacy side is not yet clear, and it may be that any of you can come with a new definition that captures another notion of privacy that we don't understand yet. So the picture is not complete yet. So you could say, how do you know that that you're not repeating the mistakes of the past? In what sense is this definition, differential privacy, a good privacy definition? And I would like to give a few criteria for what I believe makes a good privacy concept, a good privacy definition. And these are properties that some of the older attempts to define privacy, which were more ad hoc, these are properties that they lacked. Okay. So the first thing is that a good privacy concept should be a property of the computation and not a property of the computation's specific outcome. So instead of looking at the outcome, we should move our attention to the computation. Okay, and indeed, this happens in differential privacy. This is why I highlighted that this is a definition that restricts the computation, or if you wish, the analysis or mechanism, and not a specific outcome. Okay. The computation is the entity that creates the informational relationship between data and outcome, and this is why it's important to look at it. This relationship is not understood just by examining the outcome. A second property is that it provides some provable guarantees on informational harms. Okay. Want to say something like that. If an analysis satisfies pure differential privacy, then the probability that that something bad will happen to me, like I will be arrested or denied insurance or shamed socially, the probability would be almost the same whether my information is used in the analysis or is not used in the analysis. Okay, and this is something that we can actually prove with differential privacy. The probability of any event, any bad event in particular, can grow with a differentially private computation. So if I compare the setting where I participate or do not participate in the computation, but this can grow by a factor of at most e to the epsilon, which for small epsilon is about 1 plus epsilon. Okay. And interestingly, this is quite an easy proof, and it works regardless on how the bad event is actually determined in reality. So we don't need to take all the complexities of how the police decides to arrest a person, or the insurance company makes decisions on whether to insure a person or to deny insurance. We have a proof that the probability of each of these bad events will not grow by more than a factor of 1 plus epsilon, e to the epsilon, which is about 1 plus epsilon, if my information is used in the analysis, compared with the case where it is not. Okay. And similarly, we can have an analysis for quantitative values like my insurance premium. We can prove that in expectation, my insurance premium would be almost the same, again, up to a factor of e to the epsilon, whether my information is used or not. And again, critically, it's important to note that we can do that regardless of how the insurance company actually computes the premium. So we can prove this statement. So these are two provable guarantees that you can, on informational harms, that you can get from differential privacy. And currently, at least, if you look at other concepts that are out there and people are using, they don't share such guarantees. Here's a third important property that I want to highlight. This is what we call post-processing. Okay. It is important for not only for privacy reasons, but as I'll mention later on, also for making the concept more usable. But for now, let's just look at the privacy part of post-processing. And the question is, what happens if you further process the outcome of a privacy-preserving algorithm? So here it is in a picture. We have the original mechanism M is approximate differentially private. Okay, with parameters epsilon and delta. And then we create a new mechanism, M prime, that takes the output of M, does not look at the data, just takes the output of M and further analyzes it to output something potentially different. Okay, and you would like something like an information data you would want to say that there shouldn't be a way that this extra analysis of the mechanism M actually causes a privacy problem, because if there was such a way, then an attacker could definitely apply that and get a privacy breach. So with differential privacy, we can actually prove that it is preserved under post-processing, and the parameters epsilon and delta can only improve by the application of this extra post-processing. This is kind of like the data processing inequality for information theory. And as an example, this is a property that does not hold for a popular concept called k-anonymity. It is not closed under post-processing. Another property is composition, something that I mentioned. And there is, as you see here, there's a rich literature on composition for differential privacy. There are, of course, many more papers here. And for this, consider two or more independent mechanisms. They each satisfy the privacy concept requirements, and they process information about the same or related populations. Here's a simple picture on the right, and this is not the most general case. Here, the same data set is fed into two mechanisms, M1 and M2, and each of them separately is differentially private. We ask whether the combined mechanism, the composed mechanism, that where we see the outcomes of both M1 and M2 is also differentially private, and if it is, with what parameters. And here's a simple theorem. This is the most basic theorem of composition. There are more efficient ones. And it says that if we combine two epsilon delta differentially private computations, then this results in 2 epsilon 2 delta differential privacy. Or in the picture here on the right, we add up the parameters. We get epsilon 1 plus epsilon 2, comma, delta 1 plus delta 2 differential privacy using this theorem. And again, if we look at this very popular notion of privacy, k-anonymity is not closed under composition. And there's been some work showing this. It was shown theoretically and via some simulations in early work by Ganta, Katsivis-Wanathan, and Smith in 2008. And more recently, Lonnie Cohen has shown that edX data that was published in 2015 using k-anonymity, actually, it fails under composition. The same data was k-anonymized twice, whether purposefully or inadvertently, we don't know. And that results in 1 anonymized individuals. Okay, so individuals that you can actually, that are unique in the data set. So composition can be a threat in reality, and of course, also we can look at the reconstruction attacks, and including the reconstruction attack done by the US Census that I mentioned earlier, that this is a composition of many tabulations that the census has published in 2010. Each of them may be almost harmless, but when you put them together, you manage to reconstruct the data. So that's another example where composition of a scheme that fails under composition. Here's something that is related to composition. The fact that we have this parameter epsilon, okay? So epsilon measures, in a sense, loss of privacy. And it's important to have this quantification of the loss of privacy. This is because we now know that data cannot be used indefinitely. When we reuse data again and again and again, when we create a new insight, we learn something about the data, and the leakage grows, and with it, the privacy risks, maybe to the point that we can even reconstruct the data set or a large portion of the data set. Okay, so we need to quantify this loss of privacy. We need to take that over time and to take into account the different uses of the data set. Okay, this is why one of the reasons why these composition attacks are so important. The composition properties are so important. Okay, so this introduces the notion of a privacy budget. Privacy, with this view, is a consumable resource. Okay. You need to budget it, and you need to budget the privacy loss, and you need to quantify the use of the privacy budget. And if you are really serious about privacy, once that budget has been reached, then maybe you need to restrict the use of the data for extremely urgent needs, if at all. And maybe you need to use products that do not cause a privacy breach, because the computation of that product does not go back to the original data set. In particular, you may want to opt to use synthetic data that was generated with privacy from the original data and does not require going back to the original data and hence losing in privacy. Okay. And ignoring this principle, this is a very picturesque analogy that my colleague Mike Altman gave, that ignoring to do this is like removing the fuel gauge from your motorcycle in anticipation that it would run indefinitely without refueling. So think how wrong this is. With differential privacy, the parameter epsilon measures leakage and can be treated as a privacy budget, which is consumed as we compose more and more analysis. And again, and we have theorems that help manage the budget by providing bounds on the overall use of the privacy budget. These are the theorems that I mentioned in the previous slide, and they are really, really central to differential privacy. And the last property, I think now it's number 6, not 5, is transparency. And it's much better if we don't need to maintain secrecy around the privacy-preserving computation or its parameters. This allows scrutiny by the scientific community and furthermore, analyzers can look at what is happening in the disclosure limitation that this gives and the noise that is added, and try to incorporate that into their analysis. If the algorithms are secret, if we get privacy by obscurity, then we lose the two properties. The scientific community cannot give a good scrutiny to this measure, and analyzers cannot take that noise into account when they do their analysis, and hence they can incur more error or get to wrong conclusions. With differential privacy, we can offer full transparency. So both the algorithm, and the parameters epsilon and delta can be revealed. So both the scientific community and analyzer can take that into account. And in contrast, some traditional techniques, in particular swapping, which is a technique that was used by the US Census for the 2010 census and also some earlier censuses, they rely on some secret algorithms or secret parameters. In particular, for the US Census, the swapping rate is kept like a secret, and unless you were sworn secrecy and have specific access to this number, you should not know it. So I see a question about application of differential privacy in business. I will speak about applications later on. Actually, it's not that far away now. But I do welcome questions. Let me not skip Gertrude, this example, and give you an example of how we can reason about privacy and risk. And this is a toy example that we made up about Gertrude's life insurance. And I should warn, this is not how insurance actually works. This is a toy example. and a very naive one. So meet Gertrude. She is 65. She has a 100K life insurance policy, and she's considering participating in the medical study, but is concerned that it may affect her insurance premium. So if the insurance company learns something sensitive about her, that could affect her premium, okay? And let's see how Gertrude's premium is calculated today. And this is a very naive calculation that I have here on the slide. So based on her age and sex, she has 1% chance of dying next year. So if you look at her life insurance premium, it's set to be that probability, 0.01 times the amount of money that the insurance company would have to pay if she does die. So her premium is $1,000. So not realistic, because here the insurance company is not making any profit. But let's continue with this game. And Gertrude has reported to the insurance company that she is a coffee drinker. And she's worried that if the medical study finds that women her age who are coffee drinkers have a higher chance of dying, let's say 2% instead of 1%, then her premium would be set to $2,000. Okay, we could stop here even and ask, does the fact that her premium would go up to $2,000, is that does that mean that her privacy was badly affected? Okay. So I'll let you decide on the answer to this question, but I'm going to take the stand that no, this is not yet the privacy issue that I want to tackle. And the reason is that Gertrude's premium would be set to $2,000 as a result of this medical study, whether she participates or not. So assuming the medical study is done with a good enough margin, so they have enough people that they survey in this study and they get to the right conclusions, they will get to the same conclusions even if she did not participate in the study. So if there is, if the study does something to her privacy, it's not about her specific, it's not that her specific information is being revealed by the study. So I would rather this take as Gertrude's baseline risk. If the study indeed finds that coffee drinkers have a higher chance of dying next year, then it would be fair that her premium would be set to $2,000 instead of $1,000, okay? Because that would be the case. This would be learned even if she did not participate in the study. But now the question is whether Gertrude's premium can increase beyond this baseline risk. And I want to say that this is what Gertrude should be worried about, because her decision of whether to participate or not to participate in the study is going to affect this increase. And Gertrude in particular is worried that the study may reveal more about her, such as she specifically has a 50% chance of dying next year. And that would increase her premium from $2,000 to $50,000. And because this is specific for her, I would consider this as a privacy issue. In particular, this specific information couldn't be revealed by the study if she would not participate in it. Okay, so imagine that the study is performed using differential privacy with a small epsilon like 0.01, then we can prove that the insurance company's estimate of her risk of dying, it can increase, but maybe it will increase instead of to 2% to 1 plus epsilon times 2%, or e to the epsilon times 2%, which is 2.02%. So in case that it is really the case that the risk for 65-year-old women who drink coffee, the risk of dying next year is 2%, her premium would increase to at most $2,020 instead of $2,000. So her risk in participating in this study is the difference between these two numbers, and it's bounded by $20. Okay, so that's a way that differential privacy allows us to reason about privacy risks. I want to say that generally calculating the baseline is very complex and maybe impossible in most cases. In our example, the 2% baseline depends on the potential outcome of the study, and we don't know that beforehand. If that was known beforehand, then we would need the study. The baseline may also depend on many other factors that Gertrude does not know, but what she can be sure of is that differential privacy provides a simultaneous guarantee for every possible baseline value, okay? And the guarantee covers not only the changes in her life insurance, but any other adverse consequence, let's say her health insurance and more. And before I finish with this part and get to applications, I want to say in one slide what differential is not and what it does not protect. So as we saw with Gertrude's example, it's not that differential privacy disallows learning about you, okay? It could be stigmatizing information, it could be information that can help manipulate you, it can be a lot of stuff. But this is done if differential privacy allows that, if this could be learned about you, even if your information is not included in the analysis. Okay, so whatever could be learned about you, even if your information is not included in the analysis, is not protected by differential privacy, not directly at least. Okay, and you should think to yourself if whether this is a problem, whether this is a privacy problem. And I believe that in some cases it could be a privacy problem, which hints that maybe we need to enrich our vocabulary, our collection of privacy concepts beyond differential privacy. Another thing about differential privacy is that it is not applicable in settings where your specific information needs to be used. Okay, for instance, where you are served an ad. The ad, at least the advertiser would want it to depend on your specific data. It shouldn't be the same ad whether the adversary has your data or not. So this is chosen according to your own preferences, and applying differential privacy will just kill utility completely. In some cases, maybe you don't like ads and you're fine with that. In other cases, when you go to your doctor and you get some medical treatment, you don't want that medical treatment to be the same whether the doctor considers you or does not. So these are the cases where differential privacy does not apply. And again, if we want to speak about privacy in such situations, we need to see, a new privacy concept. I see a question from Or.
Not from Or. Gilad is asking, do you know of any interesting applications of differential privacy in business? And if yes, what are the top ones?
Good. So if you were listening, Or I'll be a teacher now, you may have noticed that I referred to this question and I said that I will answer it in a minute, but don't blush, that's fine. Sure, actually we're going into applications right away. Oh, sorry, before we get to application, very briefly, how you do differential privacy. And actually, I think in consideration of times, I will skip a few items here. So how do you do differential privacy? And there are going to be two parts for this, to the answer here. The first part is that you add carefully crafted random noise, like in this picture, in order to hide information pertaining to individuals. The most basic techniques from doing that is randomized response. Let me skip this. It's not very important for this presentation. And the second popular technique is the Laplace mechanism. Okay, these are maybe the two very basic techniques in differential privacy. Let me tell you a little about the Laplace mechanism. The database in this case is going to be a database where each entry is a bit. Let's say xi is 1 if individual I is diabetic. And the query that we're interested in is the number of diabetic persons in this data sets. And we note that if we look at neighboring data sets x and x prime. So we change the value for one person, say from diabetic to non-diabetic or vice versa, then this count can change by at most one. So in a sense, this is what our noise needs to hide, this potential change due to a single person. And we can return f of x, the exact count plus noise, where the noise is samples from what is called the Laplace distribution with parameter 1 over epsilon. This is how the Laplace distribution looks like. It has zero mean and variance something like 1 over epsilon squared, 2 over epsilon squared. And the property that is important is that if we slide it by delta and then we compute a pointwise ratio between these values of these two curves, then this is bounded. This is actually bounded by e to the epsilon delta. Okay, and this is the property that you can use in proving that this mechanism is differentially private. This mechanism can be generalized to what is called like the framework of global sensitivity. Again, we can define what is called global sensitivity as the maximum L1 change. So f now is a function that returns a point in the d-dimensional Euclidean space. So the maximum L1 change in the function f due to a single change in x. So we move from a data set to a neighboring data set. We maximize over all pairs of neighboring data sets. And the theorem says that if you want to compute the function f, as in the picture here, the mechanism that computes f and adds Laplace noise that is calibrated to this global sensitivity. So here the parameter for the Laplace noise is the global sensitivity over epsilon, is epsilon differentially private. And many natural functions have low sensitivity, including histograms and means if the range is bounded, the covariance matrix, and so on. And actually, this has also been implemented in various programming interfaces, in particular, McSherry's PINK, but also in some other systems. So over time, these are just two ways to make noise and that is useful for differential privacy. Over time, we have developed more and more ways of making good noise for differential privacy, and good means that it results in less noise in the final outcome, and these are definitely useful for us. Okay, the second part of the question of how to achieve differential privacy is that the composition and post-processing are important tools for combining simple tasks into more complex tasks. So you put all these techniques together in a pot, you steer with composition post-processing, and you get what we call a programmable framework for differential privacy, and which resulted in tons of applications, at least in theory, where we can have differentially private algorithms for a large variety of tasks. And this include statistics and machine learning tasks, and I refer you to Kamalika's talk later today, and the generation of synthetic data. And one caveat is differential privacy requires noise addition, so many of these algorithms work best when the number of data records is large. And finally, work with applications. And I hope these are interesting applications in response to Gilad's question. So for many years, we only had kind of a handful of applications for differential privacy. And one notable application is of the US Census Bureau. They were really early adopters of this concept. And already in 2008, and maybe even a little earlier, they had an application that is still available online. You can go to the map application and play with it. And this application gives information of where people live and where they go to work and things like that. This is a particular map is of the Redmond area near Seattle. And this was computed with differential privacy already in 2008 with a rather high epsilon. I don't remember exactly the number, whether it was 7 or 8 or 9, but this is definitely very interesting and really pioneering work. A few years after that, Google came up with what is called Rapport. It's an aggregation with differential privacy. It's a system that was used for collecting information in the Chrome browser with differential privacy. And a little after that, Apple came with their use of differential privacy. So Apple uses differential privacy to collect information from Apple machines, okay? As they say, it's collecting your data, but not your data. And both Google and Apple use a model that we call local differential privacy, and actually they perform similar computations. They have a similar goal for their computations. So let's look at this picture and how to see how the local model of differential privacy works for Google and Apple. So information is collected on users' machines, and on the machine, there is a randomizer that is applied to that information. Okay, so what is collected, and this information is collected sent to Google or Apple. So what they see is a collection of noisy information. The randomizers R1, R2, R3 are chosen so that each of them preserves differential privacy. Okay. Now, Google gets this very noisy information. It uses post-processing, and because differential privacy is closed under post-processing, this is fine. We still have differential privacy. And the result of this post-processing of the very noisy data that they receive is useful statistics, okay? And what's interesting here in the local model is that the trust that users need to have in the system is really minimal. They just need to trust that what happens on their machine is a differentially private computation, and that that the code is correct and so on. And they don't need to trust Apple, Google, or other users for their own privacy. They only need to trust their own machines. And what they need to trust, hence, is that if this is my machine, that the outcome, whether my input is 20 or 307, so 2 arbitrary inputs, that the outcome distribution would look very, very similar, okay, up to this distance of e to the epsilon, so that anybody who looks at this message that I sent to Google or Apple will not be able to tell with good confidence whether my information was 20 or 307, even if they knew that it was one of these two values, okay? So users retain their data and only send the server randomizations which preserve differential privacy, even if made public. This model of differential privacy proved to be very attractive, at least in the first uses of differential privacy, because of the minimal trust that it requires. I have to say that the level of noise that is added in local differential privacy is probably much higher than what happens if you compute differential privacy in a centralized fashion, but then you need to trust the analyzer for not abusing the data. And in order to bridge this gap in the level of noise between local differential privacy and the centralized, what we call the curator model of differential privacy, we're seeing now an emergence of new distribution models for differential privacy. I will not have time to go over them, but these try to preserve some of the properties of the local model of the distribution, and also get better utility in terms of accuracy in the statistics that is computed, okay? And in particular, what both Apple and Google implemented is a functionality that is called heavy hitters. And this is used for in several tasks. For instance, Apple uses this to learn a list of frequently typed new words. So whenever you type a new word, meaning a word that is not in the dictionary, it may be interesting for whoever maintains a list of the words in English and wants to learn about new trends. Now, what you type could either be just a spelling mistake. In that case, it's not very interesting, or it could be a new word that is used not only by you, but also by others. And then if you collect enough information from individuals, you may be able to recover these new words, for instance, phablet or Zika or oh my God, and so on. Okay. And similarly, Apple has been using this to learn the list of the frequently typed emojis. Let me very quickly go to a project that is being done at Harvard. So in academia, this is the Privacy Tools project at Harvard. And hasn't been deployed yet in practice. It's going to be part of Harvard's Dataverse platform. It's a platform where researchers, social science researchers, deposit the information that they collect during their studies, either to preserve it or to let other researchers access it. And currently there is a working demo. It has several parts. Let me look at this one, which is the budget tool. It's a tool that allows the researcher to choose from a collection of statistics that can be applied to the data set that the researcher would deposit. And as a way to showcase that database, the budget tools tells you how compute for you the trade-off between accuracy and use of privacy budget in this analysis. You can make a decision on how to split the privacy budget between different tasks and understand what kind of accuracy that you will get in each of the tasks before the computation is performed. After the computation is performed, it is released, and then it is explored using a visual tool, but this again is just post-processing because this exploration just uses the released statistics that is computed with differential privacy. And because this is post-processing, this preserves differential privacy. Another part of the budget, of the privacy budget, is saved for future queries that people may want to apply to the dataset, and there is a mechanism for doing that. Both Google and Facebook have released packages for learning with differential privacy. Google has released the TensorFlow privacy in 2019, and Facebook, I think just this month, or maybe the previous month, have released Opacus, which is a package for training PyTorch models with differential privacy. I'm not going in depth to any of these. And again, maybe for the last time today, I recommend that you will hear Kamalika present on differentially private machine learning later today. With the appearance of the coronavirus, we've seen interesting uses of differential privacy. In particular, both Google and Facebook have released community mobility reports that they computed with differential privacy. So they, of course, collect so much information about us, and some of this information can be analyzed with differential privacy to produce statistics that maybe is useful for understanding how people behave with the corona. So here, for instance, on the left, you see a graph comparing to a baseline. Okay, maybe what happened the year before, or like on an average week. I don't remember exactly what a baseline is. How how less people frequented their workplaces. And this is in the period of June 2nd to July 14th. This is a report that is available online. You can look for it. And similarly, and so you see that people have frequented workplaces a lot less after in this period than like in a regular week. On the other hand, if you look how people frequented parks, you see that they frequented them a lot more than regularly. And this agrees with our understanding of how people actually behave since the epidemic. Now, there are many challenges in these applications of differential privacy, and let me speak about some of them. And one is that this is a new concept, and it is a mathematical concept. You need to understand some math, or we need to find tools to explain it without the math in order to communicate about the strength and limitations of differential privacy with all the stakeholders, whether these are analysts or policymakers or respondents to surveys and so on. There is a question of how to find the right use cases for implementation at this stage, at this early stage. And I think the applications that we've seen give us some hints as to doing that. The second question is setting the privacy budget, and I'm also referring to a question by Gilad in the chat box. There are some important policy questions with respect to choosing the privacy budget and allocating it among the tasks. And as Gilad notes in his question, in current applications, rather large epsilon are used, so not the ideal that I depicted of choosing epsilon to be maybe 0.01 or 0.1. Actual epsilons now are larger than 1 in many cases. We would see epsilon of 4 or 5 or 6 in many applications. And furthermore, in many cases, the privacy budget is not managed the way we would want it to be managed. In particular, in some cases, the privacy is being reset periodically, whether that happens once a day or once a week and so on. And these are definitely aspects that need to be taken into account. I would think that it is meaningful to use, and Gilad, this in response to your question, it is meaningful to use differential privacy even with a large epsilon, at least at the current stage that we are at, where we are learning how to use this concept and we're trying to improve our algorithms so they give better and better utility. So definitely using a small epsilon and killing your utility altogether doesn't sound like a good idea. So what about epsilon of 1 or 5 or 10? One benefit is that it still brings some limitations from differential privacy. So even with an epsilon of 10, you're limited in what you compute about your data. So you are aware that you cannot do whatever you like, that this computation is limited, and there's only that much you can extract from your data. It may be that that differential privacy does bring in some structure that is also helpful in some of these computations, but this is not a claim that we can make in general. I would think that in cases where you are trying to use differential privacy and hence claim that, let's say, you don't need to ask consent from individuals for the use of their data, that I would take that with a grain of salt if epsilon is significantly larger than 1, and I would be more welcoming to this kind of thinking if epsilon is significantly less than 1. So, but overall, this is an area of active research, and we still need to understand how, what is the effect of the choice of epsilon in the real world, and we currently have really limited experience with that. So I hope that some of this will unravel in the next few years as the use of differential privacy grows. So I hope I answered your question, at least partially. And then another challenge is that privacy is a topic that lives in a world where we have laws and regulations and overall expectations that are not written in the mathematical language that we like and that helps us analyze algorithms and their consequences. So we need to find ways to understand whether differential privacy and similarly with other concepts match the guarantees, that their guarantees match with the expectations of privacy laws and regulations. And to emphasize some of the difficulties, let me go into the more detail into the 2020 December census use case, and I think after that it will be the point where I'll have to actually stop because of time. So the US Decennial Census is a very interesting use case for differential privacy, probably one of the largest so far. The Decennial Census is conducted by the US Census every 10 years. So this year is a census year. And the Census Bureau is the agency that, that performs the decennial census. It's bound by a law and by the US Constitution. And these give it a dual mandate to collect and publish data which is necessary for the US democracy, like the apportionment of the congressional seats. This is done using some formula based on counts provided on population counts provided by the census, and similarly for funds, for the creation of voting districts. This is like what is called redistricting. It's a very politically contested task for the enforcement of the Voting Rights Act and many other uses. And also there are uses by companies, researchers, and policymakers. And then the second mandate that the Census Bureau has is for privacy protection. And Title 13 is considered one of the strongest, if not the strongest, privacy requirements in the US law. It prohibits from making any publication whereby the data is furnished by any particular establishment or individual under this title can be identified. So it does not allow data to be identified. It's really challenging to understand what identified means. And the consequences of violating this law can be very severe. Anyone who violates this law will face severe penalties, including a federal prison sentence of up to 5 years and a fine of up to $250,000 or both. So definitely a good reason to take privacy seriously at the US Census. And this is indeed an agency that takes privacy extremely seriously throughout its history. The privacy has been applying what they call disclosure avoidance measures on the released data, and in particular, they use this technique of block swapping. There's no clear understanding of what the actual technique is and the swap rate, and I mentioned that swap rate is actually as a secret, but in swapping, if they suspect that it could be a block in New Jersey that could be identified. Maybe they will replace it with a block in Texas or something like that. Or maybe they will swap information of individuals between blocks in order to get some privacy. In 2019, the US Census announced a plan to deploy differential privacy as the disclosure avoidance for the current census, which is the 2020 decennial census. And this was partly motivated by the internal reconstruction that I mentioned earlier that was performed for the 2010 decennial census. Okay, and a little more detail about what this reconstruction showed. It showed that the block sex, age, race, and ethnicity, these were the parameters that they were attacking. It was recovered perfectly for about 46% of the population. And if you allow the age to be up to 1 year of error, then this goes to 71% of the population. We don't know that this is the best reconstruction that could be applied, so numbers could be higher. Okay, and then by combining this with commercial data sets that were available during the 2010, they managed to reconstruct and re-identify about 70% of the population. This is about 53 million people, just to get the numbers complete. And they decided to move, partly because of this, to differential privacy. And this is a dramatic shift for several reasons. First, there is now an introduction of a privacy budget. And the actual budget has not been announced yet, but it will be decided and announced. And also in transparency, now the code for the census, for the computations that will be performed for the census is available for you to run and explore. You can find it on GitHub. And the plan is to make all the parameters public. So we'll have full transparency with all the benefits of transparency. Let me give you some, actually, I don't think I have time for that, so let me skip this. It's in my slides. I'll give the slides to the organizers so we can look at this. And let me mention a few challenges that the census is facing in incorporating differential privacy. So one of them is the incorporation of uncertainty. Okay, so it happened that users and courts regarded census release numbers as authoritative ground truth. So they ignored the fact that the data was noisy, also in past decennial censuses. And it was noisy because of several reasons. One is the application of disclosure limitation techniques. Another is the application of statistical techniques for correcting the data and for imputing missing data. So the census needs to count everybody, but not everybody responds to the census. Then they need to apply statistical measures, techniques in order to be able to count for everybody. And also, the census is taken once in 10 years, and the actual counts, of course, change over such a long period of time. But regardless, people have used that data as if it was the ground truth. And in some places, for instance, in redistricting, they computed districts of sizes that are of equal size up to one person, as if the accuracy in the data really allows you to give this kind of accuracy. Now, with the move to differential privacy, it's much harder or maybe impossible to ignore the noise in the data. And there has been a lot of worry about the consequences to major users because of this noise. In particular, there was this article in the New York Times, I think in February this year, that said changes to the census, meaning differential privacy, could make small towns disappear. So the addition of noise could actually wipe out from the counts small towns. It's not clear that this is absolutely true, but it is, I think, quite intuitive that the noise will affect small counts and hence small towns more than it would affect the larger count, okay? And this can affect budgets given to small towns. This can affect redistricting that I mentioned. It can affect the Voting Rights Act. And furthermore, there is a lot of worry about research and business applications that I think some of them may have, maybe not explicitly, re-identified some of the data and used it for business applications. Researchers have used the data as authoritative and as ground truth, and now they need to take the noise into account. And this generates a lot of worry. And there are some claims that maybe the Bureau is interpreting the Title 13 requirement too strongly. Okay, there's going to be a big part that I will skip in this talk. I want to say that, just to go back to my first slide and say that we want to understand what protecting individual privacy means. So far, I treated this mostly from a technical point of view, but privacy is a concept that originates in social constructs, and we did not talk about this. Does privacy really, what we call privacy in the technical world, really, is that really privacy that we meant to have in society? And the fact that we call it differential privacy shouldn't be that convincing. If I called it a differential Lamborghini, would I have Lamborghini? I don't know. So we still need to understand what this means, and this may give you the feeling that after so many slides, that we felt that we were going, up the stairs, we got to square one, as in this picture. And really, one needs to consider this question of what does protecting individual privacy means. As I said, it's a concept that was studied by in social scientists at large, including philosophers, legal scholars, and social scientists. And there's a question of how does privacy, as defined in computer science, correspond to privacy as studied in other disciplines? Is it privacy because we call it differential privacy? And I think that would be a ridiculous answer. And I want to say that this is especially crucial for the future of differential privacy, because if we want to use differential privacy in applications, we need to understand how that conforms with the legal standards, such as the GDPR in the EU, and the variety of standards that we have in the US, like Title 13, HIPAA, which talks about medical records, FERPA, which talks about educational records, and many others. These are the ones that we have in the US. And in an article with Alex Wood from Harvard, we asked whether privacy is privacy, and we reviewed the diverging ways that privacy definitions have taken in computer science, meaning in the technical world and in the law, okay? And you may think, oh, this is fluffy, talking about privacy in the law is not mathematical. Can we really reason about this question with rigor? And I want to say that if we lose the rigor there, then maybe we lose rigor altogether. We spend so much energy in defining privacy, analyzing it, getting assurance that our definition captures some of the properties that we would like it to capture and so on, and doing it with mathematical rigor. If we miss the rigor when we speak about whether this notion of privacy really meets what we would like to get in society, in democracy, then what was all this rigor for from the first place? So I think it is really crucial that we'll try to reason about this question of whether differential privacy and other measures of privacy from the technical world meet with the expectations that we have socially, and especially those that are encoded in our laws. And let me say a few words about that. This is from work that I've been doing with colleagues in the recent few years. We see in the technical world a few concepts like anonymity and differential privacy, which attempt to offer general privacy protection. They use mathematical language and they seek to provide provable privacy guarantees. On the legal side, we see a few documents, like actually many documents, laws and regulations like FERPA, HIPAA, and GDPR that I mentioned. And they have other concepts in them, like PII and the identification and linkability, singling out, inference risk, opt-out, and many others. And these are intuitive and not formally defined, not rigorously defined, definitely not from a mathematical standpoint. They often are sector-based. You get the same definition of the same concept, PII. You get different definitions, whether it is considered in the context of medical information and in the context of educational records. It leaves significant gray areas and a lot of uncertainty in interpretation. And unfortunately, it is even sometimes in disagreement with up-to-date scientific knowledge. This is because many of these concepts were devised maybe in the 70s and the 80s and have not been sufficiently updated to catch up with our current scientific understanding of privacy and information. So when we have these two parts of the puzzle and we can try to put them together, they don't fit very well. And the research question is whether we can find a way to put them together. So I won't have enough time to tell you about this research. There are quite a few presentations online that you can search for. And let me, for the last 4 minutes, jump to my summary and thoughts. You know, we went through quite a lot of slides today. And here's my summary. We looked at commonly used paradigms for privacy and their weaknesses. We noted the accumulating failures of anonymization and aggregation. We discussed all kinds of attacks, not all kinds, quite a few kinds of attacks, including your identification, membership, and reconstruction attacks. Then we spoke about differential privacy quite at length, the origins and the motivation for the concept. We tried to understand what differential privacy is. I emphasize that it's not an algorithm, but kind of a standard or definition that provides a rigorous framework for developing privacy technologies with provable quantifiable guarantees. We talked about some of the main properties of differential privacy, including in particular post-processing and composition. And we spoke of how to compute with differential privacy. This had two parts, about the noise addition and about the use of post-processing and composition in constructing complex tasks from simpler tasks. We spoke about the differential privacy guarantee. We saw one example with the Gertrude story. I also mentioned some of the real-world application by companies like Google, Apple, Facebook, but they are also by Uber and Microsoft and other companies. The important deployment of differential privacy by the US Census, which is one of the things to look for now in the near future, in the next year or so. And I also spoke about challenges in translating all this theory about differential privacy into practice. And the challenges are both technical, but and non-technical. And I wanted to emphasize that we need also to consider a large number of societal concerns towards the deployment of differential privacy in practice. Okay, in particular, the mapping between the legal and the technical. A few thoughts about where we're heading. Clearly, personal information is collected and controlled by industry and government at levels that we've never imagined possible before. And one question is whether differential privacy and other technologies for privacy, the way that they are used by agencies and by governments, can we make sure that this is not a fig leaf and that it is a real improvement in privacy? In particular, you could be worried whether differential privacy and other technologies is used as a tool to keep the power in the hands of the few, the strong data holders, and whether it can be further used as a tool for justifying the collection of and analysis of more and more sensitive data. I think these could be bad outcomes of the use of differential privacy, and we should be on the watch so that this will not happen. And furthermore, like if we look at this, even from farther, can this imbalance between the industry and the individuals that seems to be continually growing, can it be mitigated? And which tools will help us? Is privacy a tool for that? Do we need to combine it with other tools, say from policy or economics, in order to control this imbalance? And a last question, what is privacy, is already completely lost. And some people may think that this is the case, in that case, can we use all the knowledge that we accumulate in the research of privacy to replace the functions that privacy is taking in society with something that will give similar functions in a post-privacy world? Okay, and this takes me very quickly to this, to recommend this talk by Seni Kimura. It was given last month as a keynote talk at Crypto 2020, and it's not very technical. I think it's suitable for many audiences and it's relevant for many others. If that wasn't the one before last slide in my talk, I would say stop hearing me now and go hear this talk. I still recommend that. And I think here I will finish and say thank you. And just before I give the mic back to Or, I want to say that at the end of these slides, you can find resources. There's a list of some documents that you can use to learn more about differential privacy. And if you are interested about this question of mapping between the legal and technical, we've accumulated by now some work, and the references are also on the slides. So let me just go back to this one.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just a second, yeah. Or not, yeah, not, okay. Thank you very much, Kobbi, for a very detailed talk and very eye-opening talk. Even though I know some of it and heard some of it before, it was still very, to have the view was very helpful. One question, sorry, we're doing some sound tests in parallel. My question is as follows, and I think this is, you mentioned it towards the end. How are we going to bridge the difference between what we think as humans and society about privacy and the way technologists are looking at privacy? Not just by the formal definitions, but how do you see this evolving?
That's a great question, and something that I've been working on for the last, I don't know, 7 or 8 years with lawyers and with ethicists, and or you have suffered a talk like that in Haifa University a few months ago. I think there is tons of work to be done there, and we cannot do it by ourselves. This is something that needs to be done in collaboration with people from other disciplines, and a big part of this task is to find ways to communicate in different disciplines in spite of the very, very different language and values and the ways that we argue. And to insist on rigor, because I think losing the rigor in any place here is going to mean we're losing rigor overall. And it's certainly something we don't want to do. So it's going to be a long process. I think we have some initial signal that at least in some places this can be done. I didn't have a chance to go over this at the end of my talk. This is part that I skipped, but it's on the slides. You can the viewers can look at it, or they can there are a few recorded talks online. There is a lot more work that needs to be done there. I think as more widely as a discipline, like in cryptography, and maybe even more widely in computer science, part of our maturation means that we need to take responsibility for the things that we're doing and to think about how these affect society at large. And this is why I liked Kenny's presentation very much. And these are things that I'm Seni's presentation so much. And these are also things that I've been thinking of. How do we go and take responsibility of also of this stage? We have wonderful theory in computer science. Can we go the next step and apply this theory so that we make sure that we also understand how the systems that we build, that we design, interfere with the societal systems. And usually this is much more broad than just looking at a specific problem that you have been trying to solve.
Thank you very much, and I'm terribly sorry, but we have another speaker in 5 minutes, so let us all thank Kobbi again.
A lot of noise there in Haifa. Yeah. Okay, goodbye.
And we're going to take a quick break of 5 minutes, and then we're going to continue with Anki. See you soon.